The Adeptus Astartes, commonly known as Space Marines, and colloquially referred to as the Angels of Death, are amongst the most elite and feared fighting forces in the Imperium of Man. Their primary unit of organization is called the Chapter, a self-contained, fully equipped army with its own transport and non-combat support staff, which are not counted within the chapter's numbers. Each chapter is comprised of about 1,000 Space Marines at any one point in time, as long as they follow the organizational charts set up by the Codex Astartes. And there are 1,000 chapters believed to be in existence at any one time. Due to their limited numbers, Space Marines are not the mainstay of the Imperium's military forces, despite how efficient and effective they are. Instead, they function as a highly mobile set of strike units, entrusted with the most perilous and important missions. These include lightning raids behind enemy lines, infiltration operations, tunnel combat, and facing off against the ruinous powers of chaos. When all else has failed, the Space Marines will be called into action, as they are physically, mentally, and spiritually superior to any other Imperial soldier. Delving deeper into what the Adeptus Astartes are, we are met with the stories of their genesis. These narratives focus on the tumultuous era of the Unification Wars and the disappearance of the Primarchs. It seems that amidst the chaos of war, the Emperor, attempting to guide humanity, sought to fashion warriors of unparalleled prowess, imbued with the genetic essence of the Primarchs, who themselves were imbued with his genetic essence. Said Primarchs would be spirited away by the machinations of their own mother, Erda, and the capricious gods of chaos. However, enough of their genetic matter was left behind for the Emperor to fashion the Space Marines, using the Primarch's genetic templates as a basis for their construction. And from this tragedy, 20 legions of Space Marines would be forged, each meticulously crafted from the genetic material of a distinct Primarch. And this all occurred deep within the hollowed confines of the hollowed-out Himalayan mountains. But it was not just the Emperor who contributed to the creation of the Space Marines. Amar Astartes, the leader of the Emperor's very own biotechnical division, aided and granted the Emperor with the knowledge necessary to help craft the Space Marines, and it was within these sanctified laboratories that the first Astartes were wrought. These would be referred to as the Uncrowned Princes, and they were made from the genetic material of the Primarch of the First Legion, Lionel Johnson. And as time would go on, they would be used to conquer not just Terra, but hundreds or even thousands of planets. And this was prior to their reintroduction with their long-lost Primarchs. The Adeptus Astartes, now named such as a slight against Amara Astartes due to her betrayal, would be pushed to greater and greater heights, becoming nigh unstoppable, and in essence an indomitable military force that served at the behest of humanity. As the Great Crusade unfurled, the Space Marines were used to accomplish conquests on a galactic scale, and thus the fate of the Adeptus Astartes became entwined with the grandeur and tragedy of this apocryphal campaign. Guided by the Emperor's vision of unity and enlightenment, the Space Marine legions marched forth, often subjugating human cultures, forcefully bringing them into the fold by hook or by crook. Throughout the Crusades' 2-century-long odyssey, the lost Primarchs would emerge from the shadows, each to become a legendary figure at the command of their legions. Yet amidst the glory of conquest, the specter of betrayal loomed on the horizon, and in a cataclysmic twist of fate, Horus, the once favored son of the Emperor, succumbed to the siren's song of treachery, leading a cabal of like-minded Primarchs who each took their legion with them into rebellion, which would shake the very foundation of the Imperium, as the Horus heresy unleashed a storm of despair which would change the structures and organization of the Space Marines. Once the heresy was quelled, and the rebellion legions scattered to the darkest corners of the cosmos, the Imperium stood at the precipice of a rebirth, where the surviving loyalist legions would be reorganized according to the precepts of the Codex Astartes, heralding a new era for the Space Marines. The second founding, an act of a butcher by some, as brothers were forced to become cousins and cousins strangers. This was due to the legions now being divided into autonomous chapters, each entrusted with the duty of safeguarding humanity, along with being all but stripped of their previous identity. And as time would go on, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and further innumerable foundings would occur, giving rise to new chapters, each bearing the indelible imprint of its progenitors, yet wielding an identity all their own. Today, thousands of chapters stand at the ready to protect humanity, each tracing their lineage back to the hollowed ranks of the legions. Yet amidst this sprawling mosaic of martial brotherhood stand the waning days of the 41st millennium. Amidst the tumult of an unending galactic warfare, the resurrected Reboot Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, would embark on a daring endeavor. Teaming up with a formidable fabricator of the Mechanicum, he spearheaded the creation of a new breed of warrior, the Primaris Space Marine, who were further still removed from their firstborn brothers, as they were endowed with, in essence, a new physiology and cutting-edge weaponry, and would eventually begin to clash with the entrenched identities and traditions of the firstborn chapters, and that of the identity they gained under the service of the Primarch of the Ultramarines. In part, this was due to some chapters adhering to the tenets of the Codex Astartes with unwavering devotion, viewing any deviation as heresy in its purest form, while others were significantly more divergent, tempering the Codex, or often only paying lip service to it. These range from the fervor of the Black Templars to the noble lineage of the Blood Angels and the secretive Dark Angels. While some integrated the Primaris with pride, others would abhor the very thought of them. This would include such figures as Gabriel Seth, and even entire crusades of the Black Templars. It must be noted that within the grander organization of the Adeptus Astartes, a mosaic of rather independent and sovereign chapters would develop over centuries and millennia, each boasting its own armada of transport and interstellar vessels, along with auxiliary personnel, which slowly deviated in identity from the legions of old, as they now stood as independent bulwarks against the encroaching darkness, needing to adapt to the pressures of their surrounding. However, certain structures have persisted in nearly all chapters, in particular structures and positions such as the Chapter Master, which is the highest rank attainable to a Space Marine under normal circumstances, with certain exceptions such as Dante of the Blood Angels, who was given the title of Lord Regent of Imperium Nihilus. Under the Chapter Master, there are a litany of captains, who each command a company or its equivalent. Further removed from the Chapter Master is the Lieutenant, who serves as the right hand to their company's captain, and will often be placed in charge of demi-companies. Below them is a Sergeant, who will command a squad of Space Marines, each who will be a battle brother, though this may vary with such roles as the chapter's honor guard, their company champion, and standard bearers. There is also the distinction that must be made with the first company's veterans. In particular, they will be treated with higher regard and allowed equipment such as Terminator armor. The next rank down would be a neophyte, a Space Marine in training who has not fully become a battle brother. They will be organized within the chapters as scout squads as part of their training as they receive the final implants to become Space Marines. The furthest rung amongst the Space Marines chapter organization would be the aspirant, humans who have been selected to become inducted into the chapter and have yet to undergo genetic modification. Under the organization granted by the Codex Astartes, there are also specialist ranks, which deviate from the standards. These include the Librarian, who are the psychers of the chapter. This would include the Space Wolves, Rune Priests, regardless of how strongly the Space Wolves reject the idea that their warriors draw power from the warp. These, along with the White Scars, Storm Seers, are functionally, and for all intensive purposes, librarians in all but name and tradition. However, some chapters, in particular the Black Templar, abhor psychers, so they will not include a librarius within their chapter. Within a librarius, there is a structural organization which reflects that of the chapter proper. At the top would be the chief librarian, the senior-most librarian, and often the most powerful psyker within the chapter. Below them is a courtier, who is the second highest ranking librarian. Below them is a epistillary, the third ranking, and below all of them are the lexiconum, newly inducted librarians, and the acolytum, librarians in training who had not been fully inducted into the librarium. Now, one of the most iconic roles within a Space Marine chapter would be the chaplain, warrior priests who oversee the morale and discipline, along with ensuring the spiritual purity of the chapter. Once again, there are variants such as wolf priests, interrogator chaplains, and death company chaplains as well. The senior-most chaplain and the commander of the Reclusium would be the Master of Sanctity, or as some chapters, such as the Blood Angels, will refer to them as the High Chaplain. Below them are the Reclusiarchs, senior chaplains within the chapter. Below them is the Judiciar, a Primaris Space Marine who is in training to become a chaplain. However, Judiciars do not speak. They are sworn to silence as a method of proving their faith, as their actions become the expression of their faith. There are also the apothecaries, medical specialists charged with not only healing and treating their comrades in battle, but also collecting the gene seed of the fallen. Variations of this include the Sanguinary Priest of the Blood Angels and their successor chapters. The senior-most within the Apothecarion would be the Senior Apothecary. Other variants of ranks within Space Marines are the Tech Marines, officers in charge of the chapter's technology and weaponry, along with maintaining their armory, who are trained in Mars or under the Mechanicum's watchful gaze. Variations of this include Iron Fathers and Iron Priests. The senior-most Tech Marine would be the Master of the Forge. There are also the Masters of the Signal, and much like their name entails, they are battlefield communication specialists, Space Marines who have survived and served the chapter faithfully for centuries may be selected to become chapter ancients or chapter champions. The ancient will become a revered standard bearer for the chapter, while the chapter champion is to be an exemplar of the chapter's martial prowess. As time has gone by, the chapter's cult standards, the cornerstone of their existence, has began to intertwine spiritual and martial aspects of their identity further and further still, as tradition and devotion replace the Emperor's secular vision. As the Space Marine chapters began to emphasize the virtues of honor, camaraderie, spiritual strength in ways that mirrored ancient religions, all the while paying reverence to their forefathers, their primarchs. And at the heart of every chapter, ironically enough, stands the priesthood of the chaplains, whose sacred duty is to minister to the spiritual needs of their brethren, drawing upon ancient rites and rituals which mirror faith in almost every facet, in order to guide their fellow Space Marines down the path of righteousness, instilling within them the unwavering resolve and devotion to humanity that allows them to bear unyielding determination. However, even within these practices, there are variations, such as the chaplains of the Blood Angels who are also tasked with managing their fallen brothers, the Death Company. Now it must be noted that in the wide arsenal of the Space Marines, there is one weapon which has become more iconic with them than any other. That would be the bolt gun, as it's become the thundering roar of the Space Marines. Alongside the vaunted chainsword, it unleashes devastating firepower and destruction upon the enemies of mankind. But these are not the only weapons that the Space Marines wield that set them apart on the battlefield, as they are clad in power armor which allows them to embody the Emperor's wrath with their use of some of the heaviest and deadliest weapons, such as a heavy flamer, being used with the greatest of ease, almost as a standard rifle, by the Space Marines clad in the formidable Terminator armor. This, along with the deadly Thunderhammer, which are swung almost as if they were weightless, sets them apart. And it's not just heavy weapons and armor that the Space Marines wear. Scouts will often stalk the shadows with only light armor above their black carapace, as they wield precision rifles and weapons more fitting to marksmen, such as las fusils. But even amongst their weapons and armor, Space Marine chapters each have deviated, often in line with a legion's own deviations, such as the Blood Angels' heavy reliance on jump pack troops, and the vaunted Sanguinary Guard, clad in their Artifice armor, or the Space Wolves and their Wolfen, and the Dark Angels' Deathwing Knights. But it is not just the armor that sets the Space Marine chapters apart. Each chapter strides forth in their signature colors. This distinctive color scheme heralds the chapter's legacy and stands as a symbol, not just for those within the Imperium, but to all its enemies. This is rather unlike the often camouflage-clad Astra Militarum, since Space Marines often issue concealment tactics and use their bright and bold colors to strike fear and draw the attention of their enemies in order to bolster the morale of their allies. However, those within the Raven Guard, and in particular their descendants in the Raptor Space Marine chapter, will use or heavily rely on tactics of stealth and will often don camouflage in order to perform to a higher standard than many other Space Marines. It must also be noted that within certain chapters, variations upon their color schemes are used as signifiers of their roles within the chapter's greater structure, such as the Deathwing and the Ravenwing having their own unique color schemes within the Dark Angels, or the Sanguinary Guard and the Death Company being notably different in both color scheme and arms and armaments from the rest of the Blood Angels. Now, the Codex Astartes, penned by Rabut Guillermin, was such an all-encompassing change that it even created a schedule for the Space Marines while not in combat, beginning with morning prayer led by the company's chaplain, beginning at 4 a.m. At 5 a.m., morning firing rituals would commence, as Space Marines would be tasked with engaging in target practice with their personal and squad weapons. This would go on until 7 a.m., where the Battle Brothers would engage in close quarters oriented combat practice, which may vary and go up to 5 hours. This would be followed by midday prayers, along with medical treatment and checkups from apothecaries at midday. At 1 p.m., Codex adherent Space Marines would engage in their midday meal, followed by tactical indoctrination 15 minutes later. Battle practice would once again commence 2 hours later, and then 5 hours later, evening prayer would commence, followed by their evening meal 1 hour after, which would only last 30 minutes before night firing/night combat practice would ensue, followed by maintenance rituals 2 hours later. And it is only after this that the Space Marine would get around 30 minutes of free and or personal time, followed by a rest period before their day commenced at 4 a.m. once again. Now, strict adherence to this variant of the Codex Astartes timetable would vary broadly from chapter to chapter. However, those who are more fanatical about the Codex Astartes are likely to follow this almost religiously. Yet the rigidity of how the Codex Astartes is followed within different chapters has begun to change, more so since the return of Primarch Reboot Guilliman, as it seems he now values tactical flexibility over the prescriptions of his own text. Said flexibility had already been instituted by many chapter masters themselves, seeing the strict adherence to this routine being dangerous for the chapter itself, making them rather predictable. And amidst the return of said Primarch, a new dawn has come for the Space Marines, with the advent and training of the Primaris Space Marines, which was spearheaded by the visionary Lord of the Imperium, Reboot Guilliman, as he has endeavored to reshape and guide the Adeptus Astartes through their next evolution. However, due to being so long-lived, the Adeptus Astartes, in particular the Firstborn, have developed some rather strong tendencies derived from their original progenitors, and as they were once revered as the epitome of the Emperor's great works, and are now only distinguished as the Firstborn, and viewed by their Primaris brethren as often being inferior, has led to no shortage of strife, as these new warriors serve as both a beacon of hope and a slight to many of the older Space Marines. In the vast expanse of the universe of which the Space Marines reside in, the development of the Adeptus Astartes continues to unfold with each passing moment, as new weaponry, units, and warriors are weaved into this tapestry of heroism, sacrifice, and unyielding resolve. From the hallowed halls of the Space Marine chapters, fortress monasteries, to the furthest reaches of the galaxy, the legacy of the Adeptus Astartes as indomitable warriors endures. All the while, the Primaris Space Marines stand poised to usher in a new era where the echoes of past battles reverberate